All right, good evening. I'm Bradley Graham. I'm co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine. And on behalf of everybody here at PNP, welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. We're here, of course, to celebrate one of the most noteworthy successes in the business of publishing in the past 2 decades. Back in 1997, when Public Affairs was founded, its stated mission of publishing serious nonfiction was hardly a sure bet to succeed. The new venture came as several publishing companies specializing in books on political, economic, and social events were cutting back or closing down their lists. And it had become increasingly difficult for authors of some kinds of nonfiction to find a publisher to print their works. But Peter Osnos, a former Washington Post journalist who had switched careers and had already spent some time as a senior publishing executive with Random House, had a vision. He saw an opportunity for a small, selective press that would specialize in books by public figures, journalists, historians, and social critics. And he was supported in that endeavor by Frank Pearl, the then chairman of the investment firm Perseus Capital, along with a number of other investors. The books that Public Affairs has brought to print since its founding have dealt with many important issues of the day, informing public discussion and, in some cases, stirring constructive controversy. From the first list in 1998, which featured the bestsellers The Crisis of Global Capitalism by George Soros and Blind Man's Bluff by journalists Sherry Sontag and Christopher Drew, to such recent hits as A World of Three Zeros by Muhammad Yunus and The Storm Before the Storm by Mike Duncan, Public Affairs has continued to provide readers with revealing and thought-provoking works of timely interest. Not just once, but twice, when I was still a journalist with the Washington Post, I had the good fortune to have books published by Public Affairs. I knew Peter. He had been one of my first editors when I was sent overseas by the Post. And working with him and his team at Public Affairs felt a lot like our days together on the foreign desk, except there were many, many more pages to write and rewrite for the books. When Peter asked if PNP would host an event celebrating the 20th anniversary of Public Affairs, I thought it was only fitting because the company has special significance for this bookstore. Many Public Affairs titles do very well with PNP customers, and we've even had a bookseller leave the store to take an editing position at the publishing firm. Now, we've put together a great panel this evening to talk about publishing and bookselling and the role that Public Affairs has played. Peter is here, right there in the center.
The old one.
The old one. So is civil rights leader Vernon Jordan, whose memoir, Vernon Can Read, was published by Public Affairs in 2001. And journalist Maya Rao, next to Peter, on his right, whose first book, Great American Outpost, is due out this month. But we have some advanced copies here if you'd like to get ahead of the curve. It's a powerful narrative about what the boom and bust cycle of shale oil extraction has done to North Dakota. Also participating in the discussion is Jaime Leifer, right here, the Associate Publisher and Publicity Director of Public Affairs. And moderating this evening is Clive Priddle, the publisher of Public Affairs, down at the end there, who started with the firm 15 years ago. So I'm going to turn things over now to Vernon, who has some stories to tell.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to congratulate Public Affairs on its 20th anniversary as a publisher of books that matter, and to acknowledge the very important role of politics and prose, that politics and prose plays in our community. For a long time, I had given some thought to writing about my experiences growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, and linking them to my days in the civil rights movement, and I wasn't quite sure how to do it. So I consulted with a dear friend in New York who specialized in the book business with great success. His name is Mort Janklow. Mort took me to the largest, most influential publishing houses in America. The responses were all the same. They said, "Mr. Jordan, this is a beautiful, moving outline of your life. Except for one thing. There's nothing in this outline about Bill Clinton." And so I had to explain that the book that I wanted to write was about me, not about Clinton. And I had to explain to them that my life did not begin January 20th, 1993, and that I had a life worth writing about before chairing the Clinton-Gore transition. Unanimously, the publishers responded by saying, "Jordan and Janklow, the book about you, as we've seen it outlined, gets about this much advance. But if you include Clinton, this much advance." Janklow and I tore up our contract. We remained friends, and we forgot about the big publishing houses. I was still haunted by the urge to tell my story. I wanted to tell my story. Politics and Prose, this very bookstore, got me on my way. One Saturday morning, after visiting with two of our grandchildren who lived nearby, I was exhausted by these two kids and felt like I needed a quiet moment. So I came here to Politics and Prose and made my way over to the biography section. And I saw a blue book titled Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, an American Controversy by somebody I'd never heard of, Annette Gordon Reed. I pulled it off the shelf, and while I was standing there, read the preface and introductions. That was when I knew immediately, right then and there, that I had found the person that I wanted to help me write my own book. The following Monday, I called the New York Law School where Annette was teaching. She now has 2 chairs at Harvard University. Left a message for her on the answering machine, introduced myself, asked her to give me a call, which she did that afternoon. After telling her that I was impressed with her work, I said, "I have something I want to say to you. 1, I'm a devotee of Thomas Jefferson. And 2, I'm in love with Sally Hemings." We had a good laugh about that. We arranged to meet in New York City, where I told Annette that I wanted to write my memoir and that I wanted her to help me do it. She said yes to the idea, and we have been partners and good friends ever since. As for finding the publisher, which was still a problem, I had the good fortune of being friends with Frank Pearl, now deceased, a financier and the chairman of what was then Perseus Book Group. Frank introduced me to Peter Osnos, the publisher and CEO of PublicAffairs. Peter allowed and encouraged me to write the book I wanted to write, the one I felt most needed to be written. And the result was Vernon Can Read, which came out in 2001. This is not in my written statement here, but I will tell you this. When I completed the book and told my wife, Ann, who was sitting back there somewhere, that the subject of the book was entitled Vernon Can Read, she said, change the title. And I said, no, I like Vernon Can Read. So she got all 4 kids and lobbied them to get me to change the title. They all lobbied, and I refused. And after the 10th week, as number 1 in the Washington Post poll of books, they finally said Vernon Can Read was all right. Peter Osnos deserves credit for needling and prodding Annette and me to give more when we thought we had given all. The staff at Public Affairs were indefatigable in editing, designing, marketing, and publishing the book. And I was proud to renew our partnership with a second book entitled Make It Plain in 2008. Book parties for both of those books took place here at Politics and Prose, parties for which I am still deeply appreciative. At the end of Vernon Can Read, I tell a story about how I was invited to speak at the NAACP National Convention in July 2001, where I would receive the Spingarn Medal, the organization's highest honor. I was honored and humbled to walk in the footsteps of such previous honorees as W.B. Du Bois, George Washington Carver, Mary McLeod Bethune, Medgar Evers, Langston Hughes, to name a few. The occasion called for me to look back on my journey up to that point, to the many people who helped me get there, and how our society and culture had changed along the way. I write in the book that as I pondered what to say about the years of the NAACP's history I had witnessed, the phrase, "Look what we have wrought," came to mind. There is a tendency these days to focus on what we have not yet accomplished without pausing to think how much we have accomplished thus far. It is important not to lose sight of our victories, but also to keep in mind what actions have to be created and take place for generations to come. So it is with that thought that I give Public Affairs the dispensation, the challenge to look what you have wrought with the help of your many authors, staff, and friends, like those in the book-selling community, especially here at Politics and Prose. But Public Affairs, don't get too comfortable resting on your laurels. You've got more work to do, and I hope the conversations that follows tonight can instruct us all about not just the past, but the future of publishing and book selling. I thank you for your patience.
So it's my pleasure to fling a few questions at our distinguished panel tonight, which I'm going to do in just a second. And Peter, the first one is going to come to you out of deference. But I first want to thank everybody here for coming this evening. It means a tremendous amount to us. You're our community. I've always believed that publishing depends on a weird kind of personal alchemy, that it doesn't do too good to scrutinize too carefully, but it really is a fact of how we enjoy our business and how it delivers, I think, its highest moments. And our community includes all of you, and there's many, many authors in this room, but we're as dependent on the readers in this room as on the authors, and I really want to thank you all so much for turning out. So, Peter,
that would be me.
You founded the company in the sure knowledge that we were about to enjoy the first years of the Gore presidency. What else did you get wrong?
The list is too long and the time is too short. But before I answer the question, how many of you know who Benjamin Bradley is? How many? Raise hands. How many of you know who Katharine Graham is? Can you imagine what it was like when Bradley Graham showed up in the newsroom? And here we are. Brad's come a long way from his days as a reporter, and the story of Politics and Prose is really quite a remarkable story, and the community that it serves is very fortunate.
Peter, tell him I'm not related to either.
He's not related to either. So what did I get wrong? And the question really is, what did we get right? In 1984, I left the Washington Post after 18 years and went to Random House as an editor. And that was really quite an amazing experience. I was there for 12 years and had the fortune of working with 4 once and future presidents: Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. And when in 1996 I was offered the irresistible opportunity to do another Donald Trump book, for that and other reasons I decided to leave. And on the day that I left, Mr. Bradley, Ben Bradley, called me up and he said, "So what's going on?" And I told him that I had an incipient idea for a publishing company. And he said, "Captain of your own ship." He was right, except that it turned out to be a rowboat. So I then, in a few weeks, had the good fortune to meet with Mr. Pearl, Frank Pearl, and I'm very pleased to see that Ken Sosha and John Sweeters, who were his colleagues at Perseus, are here this evening, which is, I guess, a symbol and a signal of the fact that we have really been around for 20 years. And then I thought, well, how am I going to frame this as a company? And decided that I would do it as a tribute, in a way, to the 3 people for whom I had worked over the years. One of which was Ben Bradley, another which was Robert Bernstein, the chairman of Random House, who was also the founder of what has become Human Rights Watch. And the third was Izzy Stone, who lived at 5618 Nebraska Avenue, right around the corner. When I was a kid, I used to run up here to Higgers. Was that the name of the grocery store? I mean, the department store, pharmacy. We decided to do the book, the company in there with a tribute to them and to what I considered to be the value, standards, and flair that they represented, and the fact that that's what I hoped would be the goals that Public Affairs had. People sometimes wonder why we're called Public Affairs. And I say, well, that's what we do. But there was a little company here in town called Public Affairs Press. It was run by Morris Schnapper. And he was retired, and I went to see him, and I said I wanted to consider starting a publishing company, and the name Public Affairs appealed to me. And he said, "You can use the name without consideration or compensation." I said, well, that's a deal I can take. The problem was that it was called Public Affairs Press. And I thought that initials would be PAP, PAP, not a message we wanted to send. So that's why we're called Public Affairs, one word, CAPE. And that was not a mistake.
So I want to turn to Brad, if I may. And thank you, Brad, for hosting us tonight. And you are now really at the forefront of independent book selling, and you deal with publishing companies up and down the country. But you didn't know any of that when you started out as an author. So my question for you is, what do you wish that you had known then from your experience as a bookseller before you set out to write your books?
one thing that being a reporter it gives you is just a lot of maybe overconfidence that you can just jump into anything and figure it out. And it's true. When I wrote my first book on national missile defense, I'd been covering the Pentagon, so I knew something about the subject, but I'd never done a full book. And when I wrote the biography of Donald Rumsfeld, I had covered Rumsfeld, but I'd never done a biography. Of course, when I bought Politics and Prose along with Lissa 7 years ago, I'd never been in business of any kind, let alone run a bookstore. But so you see a pattern here. I think it was an easy though transition for me to go from reporter to author, in part because I was working with Peter in Public Affairs, and I felt very much at home being edited by him, as at home as I ever felt being edited by anybody, which. There were moments, but so it was just, a longer process. And having been an author a couple of times was helpful when I became a bookseller, although there was, quite a lot to learn about the business at this end. There was one moment I remember in doing the Rumsfeld book when we'd been at it for almost 3 years. The book was about to come to conclusion, I thought, and we had a cover that I liked. And I remember getting called by Public Affairs and being told that, well, we're going to have to change the cover. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, because the sales reps don't like it. And, when you're an author, you tend to see the whole business from just one end, and there's a long other part to it. Through production and sales and so on before the book finally comes out into the bookstores. And the sales reps are key at the end of that long tail, going around to bookstores and promoting books and persuading bookstore buyers of books to stock the book. And they were getting some feedback. The sales reps were that my cover wasn't as good as it could be. Well, I didn't know that at first. I resented. I was hearing from these reps. I said, well, where were they the last 3 years while we were laboring over this book? Fortunately, though, we listened to them. We came up with a much better cover. And now this, when I think back about that episode, now after 7 years of owning a bookstore and dealing every day with sales reps and recognizing how important they are, I laugh and it's a reminder of how much I had to learn.
So Peter got his idea right. You got your book right. It all sounds very undisrupted, and yet we're supposed to have all been disrupted over the last several years. Jaime, have we been disrupted in terms of our media strategy? Did we change along the way from what we used to do to what we have to do now to get people to pay attention to our books? You're our publicity director. Tell all.
I think we have, and I think that's not unique to us. I think that's unique to the whole country, maybe the whole world, in terms of how we consume news and information. When I started 16 years ago or so, I wouldn't say it was easy. It's never easy to get attention, especially for serious topics, sometimes wonky topics. But there used to be a few things where you'd say, okay, I got a 2020 interview, I got a review in the New York Times, and now I'm going to pack up and go home. Good job, me. Nowadays, not only are some of those things not around, some of them are not effective, or, there's just not as much impact from the 2 or 3 things that we used to do. So you have to do that many more things. And plus, fold into that all sorts of things like social media and newsletter outreach and, a whole set of different kinds of experimental stuff that we never used to have to do. And I think that's true of how we consume news and information in general. People don't just get their news from NBC Nightly News anymore. They get their news in lots of different ways, and we have to kind of meet them where they are in terms of helping them understand what's in our book and why the author is writing it. So yeah, we've been disrupted a lot, but we've all been disrupted.
And I'm going to turn to Maya, who I'm thrilled her book is available to everybody next week and to you lot tonight. You will please avail yourself of this opportunity. And ask you, Maya, you started on your book when the political landscape, at least as far as the rest of us knew about it, was somewhat different. What did you know that we didn't?
So I was starting on my book in the North Dakota oil field back in mid-2014. So that feels like a whole generation ago, given the cycle of the news today and the political landscape today. But when I was out there, I was covering this largest oil rush in modern U.S. history. It brought people from all over the country and some from abroad. And, what I could see out there in this really rural, forgotten area was just that there were a lot of people who were very dissociated and distrustful from modern institutions, who didn't really trust the government anymore, didn't trust the normal 9-to-5 type job anymore. They just wanted to get ahead, and they really felt alienated, though, from society. So they were willing to give up everything and go out to the middle of nowhere. And a lot of them were marginalized in some ways and just really not on the national radar. But this was really a hub where people could kind of make it in America again with manufacturing jobs that paid very well due to advances in fracking. And so, when Trump was elected, I can't say it was totally surprising. I know journalists here in the Beltway were sort of rediscovering rural Americans and kind of rediscovering this need to go out and report in middle America. But from what I had seen, a couple years before, it wasn't really that surprising to see Trump elected and to see all the frustrations out there.
How supportive was your newspaper, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, with this project? Did they help?
They were very supportive in giving me time off, and I got to do a couple articles for them. I will say one of the most interesting things about just the general landscape of the coverage of the oil boom was that it attracted a lot of people who were parachuting in and parachuting out as journalists, but only Reuters was the only out-of-state media outlet that had a full-time bureau, which is I think a lot of that is due to the fact that it's a place that is very remote. It's logistically very difficult to get around. It's far away. Housing was very expensive because it was boomtown prices. So, I definitely wanted to be there longer than any other reporter. And, my newspaper was supportive in letting me, go out and take that time off.
Yeah, and I think if you read her book, you'll see the people she got to know in a sort of completely different way, dimensionally, from if you had been there quickly and then had to leave.
Clive, can I ask you a question? Just to turn the tables. What do you consider these days to be a successful book for public affairs? Because as Peter described, as much as he, and I'm sure you would love to have every book be a bestseller, that isn't why Public Affairs was created. That's not why you're in this business. You look for important books and something that we call in the trade sort of mid-list, really important.
Terrible term.
So what do you consider a success?
So we have to be successful as a team. All our authors every year we have to sell enough books that we can pay the bills. So there is a financial component, but I think the definition of success is often very different for each author. When it goes brilliantly well, it's kind of obvious. We are the publishing team behind the Nation Books list, and they won the National Book Award a couple of years ago. And, when something like that happens, you see success in very big letters, and you see an author's career prospects transformed overnight, literally, entirely deservingly, but a wonderful thing when it happens. But realistically, that there's only one prize, the one National Book Award winner every year, so we can't have that for everybody. So what else is there? I think one of the things that we've enjoyed most is the synergy that we feel we've had with a lot of other media. It's why what Jaime does is so important. It's why many of our authors bring media savvy and media connections with them. And you see the book being a way to galvanize an opinion or to change an opinion or to frame a sort of mission statement. Muhammad Yunus doesn't publish his books with us because he needs the royalty checks to be huge. He wants to advance an argument. He wants to change people's minds, and his accomplishments, which we are only a very small part of, are because of that sense of mission. And so I think for some authors, that is quite as important as a raw number of sales. Also, the pleasure of being here tonight, one of the many pleasures of being here tonight, is to see a number of authors who have published with us several times, which suggests a sort of longevity of career and of activity, which we're really proud to support.
Which
And
reminds
also,
me, I didn't really check to see if all your books are still in stock. So if you look for them and they're not there, just assume they're sold out and more are on order.
and I was going to say that there is a fantastic display of books here, and that's a joy too. So for me, success comes in many forms. I hope it feels that way to our authors too. And I mean, pound for pound, I think we fight our weight when it comes to sales as well. I don't feel at all defensive about that. Do I get to ask the questions now?
No, I just thought that you should have a say too. That's
What we say is that we're small but noisy, and after 20 years, we're no longer a startup, but not yet an antitrust case.
Jaime, do you think we are still recognizably Public Affairs, even though we are now part of a large French publishing corporation?
I think so. I mean, I don't think most of the rest of the world pays attention to who the conglomerate is backing you. And I think when it comes to meeting with media or, talking to authors, they know us for us. And I have been thrilled that the Hachette folks have mostly let us alone, let us do what we do. And we certainly act like we're still the startup, despite the fact that Peter reminds us that we are no longer a startup. But I think we keep that mentality and try to impart that to our authors. And I think what the authors see when they come in to meet with us is this is 1/5 of the team right here. I mean, you really do get to know everybody at Public Affairs very intimately. And we all know what everyone else is doing all the time. So it's a very small operation that really comes together as a team to support the books.
Peter, do you have a one that got away story of a book that you would have liked to?
Donald Trump's third book. I just, it just got away from it. Well, I wish I could tell you that I turned down, Stephen King and so forth, but I never did. I'll tell you what is a fact is that one of the things we had to recognize from the beginning is that we weren't going to get a lot of the books that dominate the headlines because the culture that we live in puts a dollar sign on a lot of stuff. It is a source of immense pride that someone like Vernon Jordan, Muhammad Yunus, George Soros, doesn't need the money, that people of that stature come to us. And they come to us because what we're trying to do is publish the book that they want to write. And as I, believe, and I said to Maya tonight, the thing about books that's so amazing is once you've done it, it's an accomplishment. And no one can tear it down. It's not a building. And no one else can come along and put their name on it. It's yours. So really the sense of our achievement is the author's achievement, which is the writing of a book of consequence, or else we wouldn't have the privilege of publishing it. And I think that has been, the guiding message for us. I could give you a long list of Whoopi Goldberg we didn't publish. There's a whole lot of books that are out there which are important, just not us. And so defining as politics and prose, I see Robert Siegel of NPR here. I will say that one of my early thoughts was that our audience and the NPR audience, the politics and prose audience, the C-SPAN audience, that's our universe. There's hundreds of millions of Americans who are never going to buy our book. They're perfectly fine, most of them. The people who are going to buy our books are the people. Some of you are here tonight. Some of you publish with us. Some of you listen to NPR, watch C-SPAN, and it's a world. It's a universe, and we defined it. And I think that's where we are. And I really want to again say that when I said, who do I really want to have here and say hello on our behalf? Vernon sitting in that chair over there was the one. And I am very pleased that he's here, and so many of the other authors, and Wendy Sherman, whose book is coming up in the fall, will give you a party. So I never made a mistake.
So let me ask Maya, because you're about to go out into the world and talk about your book. So far, that stage you don't know about yet, but so far, did the process sort of match what you think was going to happen? Did you feel we did right by you? You can be honest. You're talking in front of friends. Do you feel like you've been published?
Yeah, it's been a very exciting process. It's honestly been, it's taken almost twice as long as I thought it would take. It's been, much harder than I expected. I've been a newspaper reporter for 12 years, and, one of the mistakes you don't want to make is writing a 300-page newspaper article. It's easy to fall into that trap. So I think Public Affairs was pretty helpful in kind of helping me figure out how to structure something and build on something to make it, actually a real argument and a real narrative. And I've really enjoyed just having creative control. I'm one of those people who likes to have a lot of control over my work. So I feel
up to a point.
Yeah.
I know there's some other journalists in the audience who've written books, and maybe you all had this similar experience. Maybe Maya, you did too. One of the hardest things for me was, I was used to writing 500 words, 1,000, 2,000, even longer, maybe magazine length pieces in which you could still remember what you had written. The thing with a book is you launch into it and you get thousands and thousands of words into it, and you begin to forget what you had said earlier, and so you hunt around, and you can't keep it all in your head anymore, And I remember having to adjust to that fact.
So I'm going to ask one question of everybody on the panel here, and it's got to be a quick answer, okay? Not a great spiel. And then we are running close to the time where we want to open up the questions to anybody in the room who has one. So this their answers to my question gives you a chance to finally hone yours. We are, of course, a group of people in book publishing who like to think of ourselves as being sort of gentle gatekeepers of the culture, but we'll do our best if you insist on radical transparency. So sharpen those questions. And if you do have a question for us, please come to the microphone and ask it there. If you can't come to the microphone, we'll bring you one. So, as Peter is fond of telling us, just as soon as the first books had been printed by Gutenberg, somebody said, oh God, the future of publishing is dire. But we all have slight existential concerns. What do you think, Brad? Future of publishing and books. What is it that makes you wake up sweating in the middle of the night, and what do you think is going to keep us going?
Well, I will say that when my wife and I assumed ownership of PNP back in 2011, that was a moment where there were some dire predictions. The ebooks were new then; they were still very trendy. Amazon was was already dominant, and the independent bookstore population had diminished really dramatically. More than half had closed through the 90s and the 2000s. But I remember going around and talking to other bookstore owners before taking the leap myself, and I, just to do kind of a sanity check, saying, is this a smart thing to be buying Politics and Prose? And, the veterans had said, yeah, go for it, because they had seen bookstores survive through the chains, through the big box stores, and they were confident that bookstores would survive Amazon. And sure enough, there's been a rebound of independent bookstores in the last 5 or 6 years, and Politics and Prose has enjoyed that. We've been sort of riding a rising tide. But, there still are some very dark and threatening clouds on the horizon. One of them are payroll costs. I mean, Washington, D.C., many other urban areas have mandated now increases in the minimum pay, and this has a ripple effect. And unlike many other retail products, books, we can't increase the price of books. The prices are printed by you guys on the inside cover, so we're really squeezed, and other costs are going up as well. So that's a real concern going forward. Will we be able to stay in the black?
Yeah.
I think we're all scared of what certain major online retailers might do to us someday. I think everyone on this panel, and maybe everyone in this room, has the same sort of concerns. They will rule us all at some point. But I will say that coming at it from the event standpoint, seeing the resurgence in independent bookstores has been so wonderful to see. And I think it tracks with other things in our culture where, live concert experiences are still thriving, and that's how artists are making money. People really want to connect with the authors. They want to have their 30 seconds while the author's signing their book to say, your work touched me in this way. And that's not easy to replicate. So that gives me hope.
Well, I am the son of refugees from Europe and the grandfather of 5. So I'm entitled to optimism. And my feeling is that we really have navigated what is extraordinary times. In fact, better than newspapers, although God knows we are all happy to see the Washington Post's renaissance. Better than newspapers, better than magazines, many respects better than movies and music. And one of the reasons we've done as well as we have is we don't have advertising. We never did. So we didn't lose it. What we had was our ability to reach authors, reach readers. I used to say many years ago, I was a correspondent in Moscow during the Soviet era. There was no verb for to buy. The verb that people used was to acquire, to obtain with difficulty. And I used to say that was the problem with books. You'd come in and you'd say, do you have Bradley Graham's book? And I'd say, well, we did, but it's sold out. It'll be back in a week, and so forth. To a very large extent now, people have a different relationship with the book. They think of the book as something that they know they will get because the way Brad runs his store. And I will be honest, the fact that some people can download a book. About 20% of the books are downloaded. 30% last year increase in downloadable audio. Everybody's got earbuds. Now, Gutenberg didn't know about downloadable audio. So my feeling is, the fact that we're 20 years old and made it to the other shore, there is a way in which books evolve. And I teach a little class, and I asked the students and undergraduates, I said, so how many of you read Harry Potter? Everybody read all 7 volumes. There will always be book readers. If you grow up reading Harry Potter, you'll always be a book reader. And that's really been true ever since we started.
So I think that there's a really important role for nonfiction publishers to play, especially as as newspapers have, and the traditional media has had less space, fewer reporters, and especially in places away from New York and D.C., where a lot of reporters are concentrated now. And in many parts of the country, there's just too few reporters. And so books can really fill in a really important role there. And my concern is that, a lot of narrative nonfiction requires, time and funding, and there's some level of uncertainty for a while when you're first starting out and trying to, immerse in a certain environment. And so I think I'm just, sometimes concerned about how in the future authors can, get enough support for that. But I think that's really important, again, as the traditional media has less resources.
I asked the same sort of question to a colleague of mine in the office who sells translation rights in our books around the world. And she said the thing that concerned her most was Google Translate. And in a funny kind of way, I think what she was saying was that she's most afraid of a monoculture. And I think that's a legitimate fear. And I think it's also what everybody here on the panel and indeed in running an independent bookstore does so much to prevent, is a monoculture. Is to support all the little microcultures to help them flower in all the ways they can. And certainly it's what I get out of bed in the morning to do, and I've always delighted in doing it. Now, does anybody here have a question for us? Okay, we have one coming up. Please, fire away.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nathan, and I've been coming to events here at Politics and Prose for several years. Coming to events here has really been a formative and important part of my young adulthood. One thing that I was wondering, listening to the event this evening, is what do you think has been some of the most important impacts of the National Book Festival on bookselling? If I'm remembering correctly, Politics and Prose has had a formal role at the National Book Festival.
That's true in the last few years, anyway. I think this year will be the 16th or 17th year of the book festival, but we've been involved the last few as the bookseller. It's the main organizer, of course, is the Library of Congress, and they are the ones responsible for deciding which authors are selected and setting up the whole program. But it's been a highlight for us to be able to be a bookseller there. The event is one day at the convention center downtown, usually in September sometime, and it brings tens of thousands of people out to hear authors and to buy books. And we think that's just terrific. It's just heartening to see whole families, several generations of them coming and attending the event. Now, it does cause us to wonder, where were these people earlier in the year when these same authors came out with their books? But never mind, the fact that they show up at least that day and is a good sign that books and physical books are likely going to be with us for a long time.
The UK has actually had a boom in book festivals. I mean, pretty much from April through November, there are festivals scattered up and down the country. And I think we are here in the States, we're lagging a little bit in that. And it's been a very, very good thing. I think authors have enjoyed them. They get huge crowds, as you say. Some of them are in quite rural locations. These are not all metropolitan festivals. But they're tremendously popular and I think tremendously lively. So, I mean, I hope we see more of it, and I hope we'll all be supportive of it. I'm sure we will. Thank you for your question.
I always have to start out by saying that I'm not from the United States. I'm from the Caribbean. Grew up in the Netherlands. And that leads to a question that I didn't believe was touched on here. Most of publishing in the world, if you come from the Caribbean or Central Latin America, Africa, is in Europe and North America. There's a little bit of publishing, but not much. So especially a organization, a book publisher like PublicAffairs, that wants to publish important works, right, that wants to publish works that have some significance, especially at a time in the West when there's a horrific, tremendous blowback, right? Fortress Europe, Fortress America. I'm from an island, one of the so-called wealthy islands. The same nonsense is happening. We are fortressing ourselves off against all of these other people coming in. So I'm not outside of some blaming that. But the issue is, because of what we are facing now, it would seem to me that there's some necessity, right? Since publishing is largely focused in the North, that you would look and try to get people from the Caribbean, Central America, Latin America, Africa, who have a lot to say about a lot of different things. I can suggest that to you, to see if they have books and stuff like that to publish on all these issues. Do you do that?
Well, certainly.
Have you been trying to do that? Thank you very much.
It's important not to be defensive, and I don't intend to be. Of course, we want to publish as many good books in as many different ways as we can, and I think that Public Affairs does what we look for good books, and our colleagues at Nation Books do the same. There is an organization called Words Without Borders, for example, which specializes in the kinds of books that might not make it into an traditional American market. One of the amazing things about our society is that it creates things to meet needs. There are all kinds of ways to find books. You can now find books published in whatever island you came from, probably, by going online. The extraordinary change of the last decade or two is the availability of things, so the visibility of things. You can find them if you look for them. But do we do as good a job as perhaps we should? Of course not, and we'll keep trying.
Hi, thank you. My question is, in a way, kind of a variation on the last question, but it's sort of a more general one, I guess. It has to do with politics in general and public affairs. I know the main objective is good books, as you say. You also say that you pointed out there's a certain kind of book that Public Affairs does. And so I'm wondering, is there a problem, or is there a goal, an interest in the management of public affairs, in balance, in political balance? And do you have to sacrifice anything in the way of quality, for example, in order to get political balance? Or is there no, is political balance a worthwhile goal as far as?
No.
Okay.
But because I don't think we're responsible for having a politics of public affairs. And actually, we've been very articulate about this amongst ourselves. We think it's important that the list itself, the imprint, does not have a fixed political identity. Our job as publishers is to help our authors reach wider audiences and to help them articulate what it is they want to say as best they can. And it's not to get in front of that. It's not to tell them what to say. Right. So I feel pretty strongly about it that I have points of view. Of course I do. Unlike all the rest of us in this room. And some of those points of view are pretty well held, but I will not impose them.
Right. If the organization gets known as being a liberal or conservative publisher, doesn't that sort of make it harder and harder to maintain any balance?
I'll tell you that the Wall Street Journal, because we published George Soros, once called me in an editorial Marxist leaning. And I wrote to the Wall Street Journal publisher, and I said, that's the zaniest thing I've been called since when in Moscow I was called a CIA agent. And they wrote a little thing, we're wrong, we apologize. So I'm not a Marxist and not a CIA agent.
And we wouldn't mind if he was.
And we routinely have authors publishing in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times in the same day, the same week. Yesterday, we had David Smick just over there in the Wall Street Journal. And I'm sure you could find 4 or 5 other examples just from this week where someone's arguing pretty much the exact counterpoint to what he might say. So I think our lack of politics
solved the problem then.
We definitely do not take a side on that. Maybe some would like us to.
Yeah, thank you for this forum. I think this really is. I mean, this is really politics and prose at its best. Yeah. Okay, I wasn't speaking into the mic. I was just saying, I think this kind of forum is politics and prose at its best, and I really appreciate it. I wanted to throw a few thoughts at you and see what you might think. I have trouble sometimes reading books. There's too many words to get to the point, and too many pages. It could have been said in an article. So I just wonder, is there a place for, so to speak, putting a thought out there, setting up a problem or a situation, soliciting a more at-large contribution from maybe unknown people and setting up something comparable to an anthology, a compilation of short pieces to get people thinking, little books that people could carry on the metro and, read a topic at a time and stuff like that. And possibly set up a series so that it's not just the author, it's an expectation from the type of press that you do where people would look forward to the next series on a particular topic.
Clive, you want to?
So,
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have published collections of essays, so they've had different points of view around a single topic.
Okay.
A little bit wary of series, just because series tend to tire after a while. It becomes difficult to avoid it seeming samey, even if it isn't. And so we haven't published much in that way. And one of the facts of publishing, one of the things that we necessarily have to concentrate on is how do we advance the customer's knowledge of these books. And for that, there really is no better spokesperson than an author. And it's easier to work with a smaller number of authors. It's more coherent, usually, than to say, well, we've got 15 of them, and some of them are here, and some of them are there, and some of them think this, and some of them think that. So I think we do gravitate towards fewer voices rather than more. But sometimes if the idea is really strong, then it's great to have people swirl around it.
One other quick thing. A lot of books now are woe is us, look what's falling apart, look how horribly everything is going. So in the future, they'll say, boy, they really knew they were coming apart. So what I'm thinking is we need something to structure thinking as to how we're going to move out of some of these problems. And I don't think we're getting enough of that from anywhere.
Jamie.
I will point you toward Greg Easterbrook's It's Better Than It Looks. He's just over there. He will tell you about the case for optimism and why we actually can solve a lot of the problems that everyone is saying woe is me about. So just ask that man right over there.
Currently for sale.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thank you.
Clive, we have time for two more questions.
Okay.
My question is that I worry about young people reading. I don't find that high school students that I meet are reading the way we read when we were in school. We had teachers who really taught literature in high school. I'm finding now that even at colleges, certain colleges are eliminating English literature as a major. It's getting much more towards business and the like. And of course, business and the like publishes books as well. I mean, and people read them. But is the market for real literature becoming a gray market, or
No. I mentioned the Harry Potter phenomenon.
yeah, but
500 million copies of Harry Potter books have been sold.
I agree, but they all read Harry Potter, okay, and bless her for writing them and getting some people interested.
Right.
But I'm worried more about the teaching. You don't teach Harry Potter.
You can get degrees in Harry Potter studies now.
Yeah. Ken,
for better or worse.
Your concern is the right one, absolutely the right one, and our goal is to do books that people want to read, and that's what we do. And we can't force them to. One of the things you cannot do, no matter how hard Maya works, no matter how hard all of the rest of us work, at the end of the day, it's up to the readers. And what we're trying to do is create books that are sufficiently interesting and well done and well edited. One thing I wanted to say is to the gentleman who asked about making a point in a book. If anyone here wants to write a book, it's very simple. Tell them what you're going to tell them first. then tell them, and then tell them what you told them, and go home.
Well, thank you for just answering one of my questions. So that leaves me, Brad, to make a comment. I am a bookie, and I read a lot, and I buy a lot of books from Politics and Prose, okay, and support my local community bookstore. Having said that, and you mentioned Esther Brooks' book of It Isn't As Bad as We Think It Is, I'd also like to mention a sermon that Vernon Jordan did on We Have Been Here Before. And if you have not published it, it is just excellent. It may not make a book, but it's one of the most inspirational things that I have heard. And it was delivered at Howard University at Rankin Chapel. And for me, as a double graduate of Howard University, but also an African-American woman, and Maya will understand this, who is a descendant of slaves, not necessarily Sally Hemings, but certainly out of Virginia. His sermon on We Have Been Here Before really inspired me and lifted my spirits, and I think we need more of that to go elsewhere and even in the schools. Now, you mentioned about writing, and I would like to know if you wanted to publish something or do a memoir. Can you walk us through what do we do? There are many authors here and people who are already published, but many of us here are not, and are regulars. We've never published anything. We just buy and read what you promote and what other people publish.
You mean, so you're just talking about getting started on writing a book, actually going through the process?
I don't have the stature, and most people don't, of a Vernon Jordan. So how do we get to even meet you, get through the door, or anybody's door for that matter?
Well, first you find an agent, but you also write a book proposal. I think my book proposal was about 70 pages. I mean, you've got to do a lot of research on exactly the points you want to make and give some sort of outline and really think about kind of how you would market it. And I was helped by the fact that I'm already a newspaper reporter, so I already have some sort of platform. But if that's not your full-time job, I mean, even just being able to do some freelance pieces and being able to get your name out there that way, is helpful. But I mean, there are people published all the time who have not been published much before or who aren't famous. So I do think that's possible.
Okay. Thank you. And I will buy your book, Maya. And I do already have yours, Mr. Jordan. Okay.
And on that triumphant note, thank you so much for coming, really.